Hi, everyone. Judge Andrew Napolitano here for Judging Freedom. Today is Friday, April 4th, 2025. It's the end of the day, the end of the week. It's our favorite get together with Ray McGovern and Larry Johnson. It's the Intelligence Community Roundtable. Gentlemen, thank you very much for coming here. It's been an exhausting week for all three of us, and I appreciate the time that you've given us. Ray, you're in another time zone, and it's deeply appreciated. Larry, to you first. Is the EU preparing for war with Russia?
Well, they're talking about it, but if they were going to genuinely prepare for it, they'd have to recapture a bunch of industry that's gone overseas, restart some steel mills, get some factories up and running that could actually produce tanks and artillery and armored vehicles. Look, the reality, and General Chris Cavoli, the head of U.S. European Command, testified yesterday in front of the Senate Armed Services Committee, and he made this incredible admission that Russia is producing 3 times the amount of artillery shells in a year or in a month, just take your time period, than Europe and the United States combined. So the fact of the matter is Europe is totally, completely unprepared of getting into a fight with Russia if they are stupid enough to try to do so.
Oh, Larry, you have to listen to Ursula von der Leyen. She wants to command an army. Take a listen to this. Cut number 22, Chris.
We had a very good meeting of the Coalition of the Willing. The Coalition of the Willing has gotten bigger, stronger, and very determined. I've basically 3 key takeaways. The first was a broad discussion on how to step up in the support for Ukraine in the short term, financially and military-wise, the military needs that are there in Ukraine that have to be fulfilled, but also the financial needs. And here I can contribute that we will front load the EU part of the G7 loans for Ukraine. Second topic, keep up the pressure on Russia. It was very clear that the sanctions stay in place. What we want is a just and lasting peace agreement. That is the goal. And the third key takeaway was on the long-term support for Ukraine and our own European defense posture. Here, of course, the Readiness 2030 plan is crucial. It provides up to 800 billion euros of defense investment possibilities for the member states. And this means, for example, joint procurement with Ukraine in the European Union, but also in the Ukrainian defense industry. It's strengthening the defense industrial base of Ukraine. And of course, we need also a credible deterrence and defense posture in the European Union. And thus we have to develop our own defense industrial base.
Larry's right, and maybe she's acknowledging it. They don't have an industrial base anymore, and she doesn't have a military, thanks be to God. But Ray, is she poking the bear? I mean, what does she gain by making a statement like that?
Judge, she's delusional, and so are the French and the Germans, okay? They're phantasmagorical. They live in a different world, okay? Now, the coalition of the willing, why would anyone choose that phrase to describe what happened before Iraq when the coalition of the willing did not include the Germans and the French? Remember, they opted out of that thing. We don't want any part of a war of aggression because we know from Nuremberg that a war of aggression is a supreme international crime, differing from other crimes only in as much as it contains the essence of other crimes that like torture and others. So what she is doing is reversing what Germany stood for just barely 25 years ago, and France as well. They're both in this thing way over their heads, aided and abetted by a fellow that doesn't have an army or even a navy named Stormer, And so they're really delusional. I don't think they're going to be able to get to first base. The other thing is that it smells like 1848 to me. The people of Europe are not going to stand for what's going to happen to their benefits, what's going to happen to their lives if they divert $800 billion to unnecessary expenditures on defense, meaning offense.
Larry, is Europe's bellicosity attributed to, or can it be attributed to Trump's threats to either pull NATO out or dial back the American financial contribution to NATO? Or are these people that go to bed at night worrying about a Russian attack in the morning?
Yeah, they've created an enemy. It's always helpful to have an external enemy when your problems at home, that if the people were allowed to focus on those, would rise up and toss you out on your rear end. And so it's no surprise that Macron, Starmer, and now Merz in Germany are raising the specter of a Russian threat that, it's not Russia that's deployed 5,000 troops to the border in Estonia. That's Germany. So all of the offensive actions, the actual attacks that are taking place on another country, are being carried out by the French, by the British, by the Germans, by the Poles, by the United States, by the Canadians, by Spaniards, who just go down the list. So as a result of this kind of aggression, Russia is being provoked again into having to take some strong measures. I mean, just imagine how we would react in the United States if the Russians deployed 5,000 troops just across the border to Tijuana, Mexico. Do you think people would give a damn? You bet your life they would.
Yeah, of course they would. All right, Ray, let me flip the coin here. Is the United States preparing for a war against Iran? Is Yemen the bombing of civilians, the slaughter of civilians in Yemen, a prelude to that war?
Well, we used to have a constitution which required the House of Representatives to approve a war. That no longer obtains, apparently, with respect to Yemen. Whether it obtains with respect to Iran, well, it will be the same thing if the neocons have their way. It all depends on whether Trump is mousetrapped by Netanyahu into attacking Iran. I wish I could predict whether he's going to be mousetrapped. I can't predict. Certainly, they're preparing. They have those stealth bombers and everything else, but so are the Iranians. My guess is that finally someone will get to Trump, maybe somebody like Cavoli, the general, or the other generals that are responsible for that area, and say, look, Mr. Trump, it's going to be the end of Israel. It's going to be the end of many of our bases in the Middle East if you attack Iran. I think that's what will happen. I hope somebody tells Trump before he does it.
Larry, is General Cavoli credible? You quoted him earlier. You've also been critical of him.
Credible in terms of, is he a threat to Russia? Yes, he's a credible threat to Russia. He's been involved with helping, being sort of the leading force in the kinds of weapon systems, ATACMS and HIMARS provided to the Ukrainians, and in targeting those on Russian targets and civilians.
The guy's a 4-star and a professional. Doesn't he know this is a losing cause?
No, he continues to put the cheerleader uniform on and dance around with his pom-poms. We saw, it was fascinating in his testimony yesterday that at the start of one of the sentences in his opening statement, he said, despite the degradation of the Russian military from the war. And yet, when you read all of his testimony, how about troop strength? Well, he went with the lie that Russia's losing an incredible number of soldiers, but then he had to admit, yeah, but their army's grown to 1.5 million, and they're adding 30,000 soldiers a month, which is 360,000 a year. So, yeah, they have no problem maintaining manpower. As far as equipment losses, yeah, they've lost a lot of equipment, but actually, Russia's been able to replace it all immediately. So Russia's defense industry is doing well. Then he went on to point out, what I refer to with the artillery shells, that yeah, they're actually outproducing us on artillery shells, and yeah, the Navy and the Air Force, they're also doing well. They've hardly been damaged at all. And so you're sitting there going, what the hell are you talking about degraded? Where have they been degraded? He doesn't cite a single instance. And he's got his head so far up the NATO opening that he's actually opposing Trump. Trump has talked about putting a European as a supreme allied commander of NATO. And here's Cavoli saying, oh, no, we can't have that.
Is General Cavoli the head of CENTCOM or the Supreme Allied Commander of NATO?
EUCOM, European Command, U.S. European Command. It's based in Stuttgart.
Which used to include Israel. But they changed that.
Were you surprised, Ray, by that piece in the New York Times that General Cavoli and others were meeting with General Zaluzhny and planning the war, which they must know as professionals they're going to lose?
Judge, I think Doug McGregor has said it best. The people who bubble up to the top of our military now are yes people, some of them women now. They say, yes, we can do it. President says, hey, can you build a wharf? Can you build a thing that we can land supplies on so we can supply Gaza? Oh, sure, we can do that. Well, they couldn't do it, and the thing drifted away after a couple of weeks, okay? So they just salute smartly. Now, this is really odious, because if the military tell Trump untrue things like Russia's running out of ammunition, which they told them 2 years ago, or that Iran is kind of a pushover. If Netanyahu wants to do it and you give us the order, we could do it, sir, even if it risks a regional war or even worse. So what we need to have is some sane voices, and there may be some sane ones around. There were some sane ones advising caution on Ukraine, and I still believe there's going to be a deal there. But I think that Putin and Trump have to move pretty quickly on Ukraine, because in my view, Trump is in danger right now. In danger for lots of reasons. And if I were an advisor to Putin, I would be saying, look, cut a deal with Trump now while he's still around.
Tell me how credible, Larry, Marco Rubio is. Here he is, actually earlier today at a NATO meeting. Chris, cut number 2.
The Russians are preparing to start another military campaign.
Well, then we'll know they're not interested in peace.
And at this very moment, they're targeting energy sites. Can I get a reaction to that?
Targeting what? I'm sorry?
Energy sites in Ukraine.
Well, again, I get that means they're violating the ceasefire. That's not a good sign, but I think I would tell you this, that ultimately this is a war right now. Things are going to be blowing up in Ukraine and inside of Russia because there's still a war going on. That's what we're trying to end. Okay, if we have a true ceasefire, which is what we wanted, a complete ceasefire, nothing should be blowing up. But the Russians didn't agree to that. They wanted a partial. And then obviously when you get into these partials, that's one of the reasons why we didn't push for a partial. We'll take it because it's better than nothing. But one of the reasons why we didn't push for a partial, because there's always disputes about what are you hitting and what you're not hitting. But in the end, this is still a war.
Yeah, I mean, he's not listening to the Russians. You and I both heard Lavrov explain very clearly. Russians have zero interest in a ceasefire. They want a permanent solution. They want to address the root causes of this, one of which is NATO's endless expansion to the east, to Russia's borders. They want NATO to stop providing and facilitating military attacks on Russia. They want Ukraine to withdraw from Russian territory, which includes Zaporizhia, Kherson, Lugansk, and Donetsk. And until that happens, Russia is not going to agree to a ceasefire.
Why can't Marco Rubio say what you just said?
Either he doesn't read or he refuses to listen to the Russians. I mean, all along I keep saying they're not listening to the Russians.
Right.
Because he doesn't tell the truth, Judge. I mean, the Russians did agree to a very limited ceasefire with respect to hitting the enemy's energy infrastructure.
Right.
If I'm not misled, it was the Ukrainians that violated that. It was kind of an inchoate ceasefire because no one knew when it really began until the Russians made clear, well, it began on the 18th of March when we had that agreement, but the Ukrainians are violating that right and left, assisted by the British and the French because they have the technology to enable them to do that. So Rubio is, I don't, he's a pretty smart guy. He went to one of those very, very, very smart colleges, right? So he's lying through his teeth if he's telling the American people or the international press that it was the Russians that violated this very, very delimited, because the Russians insisted it be delimited, a ceasefire. I don't get it. As Larry says, that's not what that's not what Putin is saying. All important is the fact that Putin and the president are dealing one-on-one. I hope they meet soon, because I said before and I'll say again, I don't know how much longer Trump is going to be with us. He's doing very dangerous things to people who could do the same thing to him that they did to JFK 62 years ago.
Larry, how smart or dumb was it for Secretary Hegseth to be threatening China while he was in Japan earlier this week?
Yeah, I've always had a rule of thumb. I never walk into a bar and challenge everybody in the bar to a fight unless I make sure that I know the owner of the bar and that everybody that's in that bar is my friend. Okay? because otherwise I'm setting myself up to get my butt kicked all over the space. And right now what we're seeing, the United States is suffering a shortage of missiles of a whole variety, whether we're talking Patriots, ATACMS, HIMARS. They want to prioritize those weapons for the Indo-Pacific theater, specifically to be targeted at China. But yet, we're out there firing away at Yemen, and we're also actually engaged, as we learned from the Adam Enthouse article in the New York Times on Monday, that we're directly engaged. We got U.S. troops and CIA personnel on the ground in forward positions helping target the Russians. So, we're now in, let's call it a two-front war, and Hegseth wants to go three. I got fired from Fox in the end of 2002. They wouldn't renew the contract because I went on Hannity and Combs and said in November 7th of 2002 that if the United States went in and invaded Iraq, we would not be in a position to fight a two-front war. We should focus on Afghanistan. And I said that, and Roger Ailes went, oh, can't have that. So they said, don't renew his contract. But I was right then, and I'm right now.
Ray, the CNN reported just a few minutes ago, I don't know if this is a leak from the Defense Department or if they've actually published it, that the bombings in Yemen have cost over $1 billion. According to Pepe, and he was there, Pepe Escobar, all they've done is destroy civilian structures. They haven't damaged the offensive capability of the Houthis. They certainly haven't dampened the ardor of the Houthis. All they've succeeded in doing is arousing animosity toward the United States. Does that number shock you, $1 billion?
It's chump change, Judge, chump change. We're talking the Pentagon, aren't we? All of our discretionary, 60% of our discretionary spending goes to defense, meaning bomb the hell out of people who can't retaliate. It's not going to work with the Yemenis. Didn't work with the Vietnamese. Yeah, they have bare feet. Yeah, they're not the same color as we are, but they're determined. And I have to say that when you look for people of principle in this world, people who will make sacrifices for a greater good with no real good in it for them, look at the Houthis, who had a ceasefire of their own, or at least stood down on their embargo or their trouble in the Red Sea, while the Israelis observed phase one of that most recent ceasefire, now moribund. Okay, so when the Israelis started denying trucks going in to relieve starvation in Gaza, the Houthis said, "Okay, we'll give you 4 days. You let those damn trucks in, or we're going to resume our attacks." And that's exactly what happened. So, in a way, maybe we can look at this bravado, with central casting. Who the hell is Hickseth? Who the hell is Walls? Well, they were picked because they look like Dick Tracy, for God's sake, and they really look good. Okay, so
Waltz does
Dick
look
Tracy,
like Dick Tracy.
Dick Tracy, I guess that's right. That's well, anyhow, I'll tell you about Dick Tracy later. But anyhow, what do these guys know? Obviously, they know very little. So the saving grace will be when somebody tells Trump, "Hey, this is really a bridge too far, Iran. Beat the hell out of the Houthis. That will make you look good and make these square George guys look good." But I just hope, but I think I actually expect that when Trump realizes that not only is the stock market going to go precipitously down as it is doing as we speak, okay, but the whole world is going to go into an economic depression if he takes on Iran, because Iran has a deterrent and will retaliate, and not only against Israel.
Larry, do Trump's threats to bomb Iran move the ball forward? What do they accomplish? Are they real? Is the government preparing to do it, or is it Trump's bluster off the top of his head?
It depends on what Trump's real motive is. There are two possible motives. The one he states that, we got to keep Iran from getting the bomb, is not backed up by the facts. Number one, you've got the DNI through their intelligence assessment saying Iran's not working on the bomb. But more importantly, the agreement that Iran signed with Russia on January 17th stipulates that Iran and Russia are going to cooperate on non-proliferation. Russia's not going to sign an agreement with Iran if Iran is working to develop a nuclear warhead. So I think that's not really the reason. I think the real reason is Trump wants to destroy Iran in order to trap Russia, because right now Iran and Russia, as part of that treaty, they agreed to further and expand the work on this, what's called the North-South Transport Corridor. That allows then goods to come from the Indian Ocean into the Arabian Sea, transit through Iran, through the Caspian Sea, into Russia. That eliminates for Russia any dependence whatsoever on the narrow exit out of the Black Sea into the Mediterranean and on the Suez Canal. It actually, from a strategic standpoint, it improves Russia's ability to be independent of Western financial controls. If the United States, if they destroy Iran and take control of Iran, they'll box Russia in. And so I think that's actually, I always follow the money. There's more money in this than there is in this boat. They're using the nuclear threat because it's a good Hollywood image. It scares people, but it's nonsense. Iran is not building a bomb, particularly now since they are cooperating with Russia on non-proliferation. Russia doesn't play games on that front.
Here's the State Department spokesperson on this. This is absolutely dreadful, but I solicit your guys' comments. Now, I know her, Tammy Bruce. We worked together at Fox for a number of years, but this is just absurd. Cut number 18.
Iran's behavior across the globe threatens U.S. national interests, which is why President Trump reimposed the maximum pressure campaign designed to end Iran's nuclear threat, curtail its ballistic missile program, and stop it from supporting terrorist groups. As the president has said, Iran can never have a nuclear weapon. He has also been very clear that the United States can't allow that to occur. The president expressed his willingness to discuss a deal with Iran, as we know. If the Iranian regime does not want a deal, the president is clear he will pursue other options, which will be very bad for Iran.
To think how we used to mock her predecessor, Matthew Miller, Ray. All she did was read some nonsense that somebody wrote for her. I wish Max were there to challenge her.
Well, she too is from Central Casting.
Yes.
You know, the whole business, nuclear weapon, that's what they're going to get. Okay, so they're pushing on an open door, like that. Okay. What I was looking for in this annual threat assessment was a reiteration of what the U.S. intelligence community, to their credit, in 2007 decided, and that was that Iran has stopped working on a nuclear weapon at the end of 2003, had not resumed work on a nuclear weapon. And the threat assessment, 2 weeks old now, said exactly the same, that Khamenei, the supreme leader, had not reauthorized the program that he himself canceled at the end of 2003. So if they want a new pretext, fine, but don't push at that open door saying, oh, we're not going to let them get a nuclear weapon, because it's the nuclear weapon, not the enrichment, that matters. A nuclear weapon takes several months to build, and we have monitoring up to kazoo from satellites as well as cameras on site to make sure that we know exactly when they start doing that, and they haven't.
Chris, I am looking for Prime Minister Netanyahu's statement about we have to coerce countries into suppressing free speech. You know, I've been doing battle for weeks with the people that I work with, not the people on this show, my other job at Newsmax, over the freedom of speech. Here's the root of the suppression of free speech on college campuses in America. Chris?
These ignorant demonstrators. Who are they demonstrating for? For these murderers, these rapists, these mass killers. This is a reflection of a deep rot that has pervaded the intellectual hub of free societies. And this vilification of Israel, the Jewish people, and Western values has been propagated by a systemic alliance between the ultra-progressive left and radical Islam. It must be resolutely fought by civilized societies to safeguard their future. This is why we must all commend President Trump's decisive actions against anti-Semitism, and we must pressure other governments to do the same.
Ray, the last 5-6 words, and we must pressure other governments to do the same, to suppress the freedom of speech.
There is rot. There is lots of rot, Judge. That's why I wear this keffiyeh. One can no longer be neutral in such circumstances, circumstances of genocide. To be neutral is not possible in times like these. It's to be on the side of the oppressor, as Desmond Tutu warned us many years ago. Now, we have a constitution and we have a Bill of Rights. Who is Netanyahu to tell us to deprive people on the Columbia or Yale or Harvard campus from expressing those rights in speech, non-violently? Who the hell does he think he is? And when he's instructing foreign governments to do this, well, is there no shame? Is there no shame on the part of Congress or on part of the administration to say, no, look, I mean, that's a bridge too far. Don't tell us what to do. We have a Bill of Rights. We're gonna observe the protections that exist, not only the First Amendment, but the Fifth Amendment, but the Fourth Amendment, all of them. We're going to observe them. Don't tell us not to do that. And just to watch how university presidents are kowtowing to this, it's, you know, the university itself is at risk now, because it used to be a place where you could freely express ideas, no matter how extreme, as long as you did it non-violently.
Judge, let me jump in here with some facts. since August of 2000 until October 8th of 2023. The Palestinians, and this is according to data provided by the Israeli government and the Israeli Foreign Ministry, the Palestinians were implicated in the deaths or the killings of 2,755 Israelis. That's over a 25-year period. The only mass murderer here is Bibi Netanyahu and his Zionist thugs. They have killed, murdered over 60,000 Palestinians, an estimated 17,000 children. Moreover, over the last 25 years, according to the State Department's annual report, country reports on terrorism, the groups that are carrying out terrorist attacks in Europe and in the United States are not groups linked to Iran, are not groups sponsored by Iran. They are Sunni groups that have been funded and supplied by Gulf Arabs, Saudi Arabia in particular, as well as our old outfit, the CIA. So let's deal with facts as opposed to this, mindless propaganda presented by Netanyahu.
Here's Daniel McAdams from the Ron Paul Institute, good friend of mine, Larry. I think he's a friend of yours also.
Yes.
On the mob mentality. He's talking about deportations, but it's the same thing. Ray mentioned the Fifth Amendment. Today, a federal judge, right before we came on, ordered the Trump administration to retrieve a human being that they deported to a hellhole in El Salvador with no hearing whatsoever. He's not a person that's deportable. Cut number 25.
But when you start scooping up hundreds of people and send them off to a foreign gulag without any due process at all, some of them are legally here, then you've got a big problem, and you've got a lot of red meat people standing up and down and clapping because they hate Biden so much for opening the border. It's just a sort of action reaction, and I think it's dangerous. I hate when I feel this mob mentality. We had it right after 9/11, and anyone who said, hey, why don't we tap the brakes here? You're with the terrorists. We had it in the frenzy up to the Iraq war, the same kind of thing. We're sensing it now, and it's dangerous. I think this one actually may be the most dangerous because there's this massive crackdown on the First Amendment is really coming to be a big problem.
So when Netanyahu spoke before Congress last year, and they gave him, I don't know, maybe I have the numbers slightly wrong, 58 standing ovations in a 56-minute talk, something as absurd as that. The longest and loudest standing ovation was when he condemned the demonstrators outside the Capitol, three of whom are friends of ours, Aaron Mate, Max Blumenthal, and Colonel Larry Wilkerson. But that's what the Congress stood up and cheered. Ray, you made the point. These members of Congress took an oath, the same oath you guys did when you worked for the Central Intelligence Agency, the same oath I did when I became a judge, to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution, which includes the Bill of Rights. Ray.
Money speaks, Judge. You have the Israel lobby, which funds many of those Congress people and senators. And you have in various administrations, starting before John Kennedy, people like James Jesus Angleton, wedded to the Israeli security services at the hip, responsible now, we know from documentary evidence, for lying about what he knew about the so-called fellow who killed John Kennedy. And we have people who lie and cheat and steal, and now are proven to have been lying and cheating and stealing. And so these JFK documents that were just actually released, well, they have been parsed now. And the testimony from Tuesday shows that the three top CIA leaders, Director Helms, James Angleton, head of counterintelligence, and a fellow named Ioannidis, who ran covert action for the Miami station, all knew chapter and verse about Oswald well before he shot John Kennedy. So what we have here is a conspiracy where now it's being revealed will these people who know a lot, will they be held accountable? Well, we don't know how this House committee will proceed, but hopefully that investigation will be reordered, and we'll learn not only about assassination techniques, but about what our security services, as well as our Congress, does, indebted to the state of Israel and the money that Israel and the people who support it provide for our lawmakers and for our officials.
Isn't there a street in Tel Aviv named after James Jesus Angleton?
Now, there's at least a forest, a grove of trees and a plaque. And, Angleton, what the documents revealed, number one, is that Angleton was actively involved in working with the Israelis to thwart John F. Kennedy's efforts to control and prevent Israel from getting a nuclear weapon. They killed Kennedy in order to help do that. But the other thing that comes out of this is that Lee Harvey Oswald was part of a program called Operation Red Cap that Angleton had set up to insert defectors into the Soviet Union in hopes of getting a penetration. Oswald was recruited into that program out of his assignment at a CIA base in Atsugi, Japan. And so the fact that some of the people have tried to speculate that, Angleton was just monitoring Oswald because he thought he was suspicious. No, he was one of his operatives, for God's sake.
Here's a factoid, Judge, that you might not know. I was an analyst for Russian foreign policy. If I wrote a memo or an estimate that mentioned Israel, it had to go to James Angleton first. He, on the operation side of the House, if it mentioned Israel, it had to be approved by James Jesus Angleton. Luckily, most of those things didn't mention Israel, or if they did, it was just an aside. But my God, the guy had control. And now we know he had 200 pages of information on Oswald on his desk before Oswald was accused of shooting John Kennedy. What we know also from that testimony is that 21 doctors at the Parkland Hospital in Dallas testified under oath that they saw the right backside of John Kennedy shot out, blown apart by a bullet that entered from the beginning. Those findings were reversed somehow at Bethesda Naval Hospital just hours later. So the testimony is very damning. The question is, what will happen to the institutions, not only the CIA, but the military, who are deeply involved in this plot? And I look for some actions now, because the evidence is out there. It's unimpeachable. It's in their hands. It's unredacted. And I applaud President Trump for finally taking the steps to make almost all of it public.
Larry, last question. Almost all of it. The President of the United States, the Director of National Intelligence, the Director of the CIA, the Attorney General of the United States, the Director of the FBI, all ordered that this stuff be revealed. Are there still documents being held back, Larry Johnson?
Yeah, the complete file on Oswald is his participation in Operation Red Cap. That was run out of eventually a site in North Carolina that's near Nags Head. That's still a classified facility. But that's one of the reasons the night that Oswald was arrested, he called a former naval intelligence officer who was essentially his cutout, his handler from that program. So, Oswald was, when his claim that he was a patsy, I think was a valid claim on his part.
Gentlemen, thank you very much. A lot of topics that we discussed. Deeply appreciated. Ray, I know you're traveling. Thanks for accommodating our schedule. Safe travels home. And
Thank
we'll
you.
look forward to seeing you both at your usual times on Monday morning, God willing. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you.
Thank you, Judge.
Of course. And Monday morning, as usual, Alistair Crook at 8 in the morning, Ray McGovern at 10, and Larry Johnson at 11:30. These guys do double and triple duty. God love them. Judge Napolitano for Judging Freedom.